The ocean is beautiful, but it doesn't care who you are. In these true harrowing stories, people found themselves face to face with nature's most dangerous predators in the most unexpected places. A sunset swim, a honeymoon dive, a flooded street, or a calm beach stroll. Whether it's a shark, a crocodile, or something lurking beneath, these attacks happened fast and without warning. Some survived, some didn't. From calm beaches to blood-stained waters, these are 6 moments when nature strikes back. In 1998, deep within the remote coastal wilderness of northern Queensland, Australia, where mangrove forests wove intricate waterways leading into the Coral Sea, 32-year-old Lisa Bell searched for the perfect photograph. The area had long been known to locals as Crocodile Country, a place where indigenous tribes had passed down warnings through generations about the ancient reptilian predators that ruled these waters. The small fishing village of Port Douglas had seen its share of tourists come and go, but none quite like Lisa. A freelance photographer known for her daring captures of wildlife in their natural habitats, Lisa had built her reputation on getting dangerously close to her subjects. Her portfolio boasted intimate portraits of venomous snakes, charging rhinos, and territorial hippos. Her colleagues often joked that Lisa possessed either incredible luck or a death wish, perhaps both. The villagers who had hosted her for the past week noted her dismissive attitude toward their warnings about the local saltwater crocodiles, especially during the October mating season when males became particularly aggressive. On that fateful evening of October 12th, Lisa set out alone to capture what she described to the innkeeper as the perfect golden hour reflection on still tidal waters. She packed her waterproof camera case, a small tripod, and a bottle of insect repellent. She wore khaki shorts and a light blue tank top, colors that would later make identification grimly straightforward. According to Hamish McGregor, the local guide who had refused to take her to the specific tidal creek she was interested in, Lisa had been fixated on photographing what locals called Blackwater Junction, a particularly remote spot where freshwater met saltwater, creating unique lighting conditions at sunset. The tide was coming in when Lisa arrived at the creek's edge. She had parked her rented four-wheel drive about half a kilometer away and hiked through dense brush to reach the secluded spot. 2 fishermen, brothers Darren and Kyle Thornton, later confirmed seeing her tripod set up at the edge of the mangroves from their boat while checking crab pots along a nearby channel. According to their account, they heard sudden, high-pitched cries at approximately 6:25 p.m., cries they described as blood-curdling and unlike anything human. Alarmed, they started their small aluminum boat's motor and sped toward the source of the noise. By the time they arrived, the water had already calmed. All that remained was Lisa's wide-brimmed hat floating on the surface and expanding ripples. They reported a massive disturbance beneath the water, a rolling, thrashing motion characteristic of a crocodile's death roll. Kyle Thornton, an experienced local hunter, estimated the size of the animal to be between 14 and 16 feet based on the turbulence and patterns in the water. They circled the area for nearly 20 minutes, desperately searching for any sign of the woman, before rushing back to the village to alert authorities. A search party was organized that night, but darkness and the natural hazards of the creek hindered their efforts. The next morning, Senior Ranger Malcolm Livingston led a team that located a territorial male saltwater crocodile approximately 15 feet in length, lurking in a deep channel less than 50 meters from where Lisa had disappeared. Signs that the animal had recently fed supported suspicions of its involvement. After securing the necessary permissions due to the species' protected status, officials made the difficult decision to euthanize the crocodile in an attempt to recover potential remains. Lisa's parents, Walter and Margaret Bell, flew in from Seattle upon receiving the devastating news. In a statement to local media, they described their daughter as fearless to a fault and someone who lived entirely on her own terms. They did not blame local authorities or the wildlife itself, acknowledging that Lisa had always understood the risks that came with her profession and passion. Lisa's final moments were reconstructed based on the Thorntons' eyewitness account and the scene they described upon arrival. Wildlife experts speculated that she may have stepped into the shallow water to capture a self-portrait as a silhouette against the sunset. A risky, but not uncharacteristic move, given her past work. No physical footage was recovered, but the presence of her gear and the eyewitness reports provided a clear narrative. Lisa's death sparked intense debates about wilderness safety and responsible tourism. The village erected a memorial plaque at the visitor center, displaying one of her sunrise photographs alongside safety guidelines. Local tour operators reported a temporary decrease in bookings, followed by an unusual surge in adventure tourism from those morbidly fascinated by the incident. The most poignant artifact from the tragedy was Lisa's final image collection, curated from her earlier days in the region. Published posthumously under the title Final Light, it received critical acclaim for its haunting beauty and stood as a powerful reminder of nature's capacity for both splendor and deadly indifference. The Queensland government subsequently established stricter regulations for solo travelers in known crocodile territories, requiring mandatory safety briefings and signed acknowledgments of risk. The locals still tell Lisa's story to visitors who seem too cavalier about the dangers lurking beneath the serene waters. They point to the tidal creek, now unofficially known as Bell's Waters, as a place where human curiosity and wild nature collided with tragic consequences. In 2007, Port Lincoln, South Australia, was renowned for its pristine beaches and abundant marine life. The small coastal town sat on the edge of the Spencer Gulf, where crystal-clear waters met rugged coastline, creating an ideal destination for travelers seeking both adventure and serenity. For generations, local fishermen had respected the delicate balance between human recreation and the domain of the ocean's apex predators. The waters surrounding the Eyre Peninsula had long been recognized as a haven for great white sharks, drawn to the area by the rich seal colonies that populated the offshore islands. Into this picturesque yet potentially dangerous paradise came newlyweds Jonathan and Eliza Richardson. Both 33, they had postponed their honeymoon for several months following their winter wedding to coincide with Australia's summer season. Eliza, 5 months pregnant with their first child, had specifically chosen Port Lincoln for its reputation as a relaxed coastal getaway, with gentle swimming coves, perfect for her condition. The couple had traveled from their home in Melbourne, seeking one last romantic adventure before embracing parenthood. On February 18th, they checked into a secluded rental property featuring private beach access to a quiet, small cove. The property manager, Maureen Donovan, later reported having mentioned the standard safety briefing about swimming locations, but acknowledged she hadn't emphasized the risks of shark encounters since there hadn't been an incident in the area for over 17 years. The bay's shallow, protected waters were considered safe by locals and regularly used by families with young children. The third day of their stay dawned clear and calm. According to Jonathan's subsequent account to authorities, they had decided to take advantage of the perfect conditions for a morning snorkel in the bay. They entered the water just after 9 o'clock a.m., when the sun was high enough to illuminate the small reef system that extended about 40 meters offshore. The water was unusually clear following a week without storms, offering visibility to about 6 meters depth. Eliza, an experienced swimmer despite her pregnancy, had chosen to wear a black wetsuit with blue accents to protect against the chill of the Southern Ocean. Jonathan, swimming nearby, had been photographing small reef fish with an underwater camera. He later reported that neither of them had ventured beyond where they could stand, staying within the sandy bottom section that rarely exceeded chest depth. At approximately 9:40 a.m., the tranquility was shattered. A 4-meter great white shark, later identified by marine biologists as a young adult female, appeared without warning. The shark struck Eliza from the side, its powerful jaws clamping onto her hip and upper thigh. According to Jonathan's harrowing account, there was no warning shadow, no fin slicing the surface, just the sudden, violent intrusion of the massive predator into their peaceful morning. Marine biologist Dr. Catherine Wells, who investigated the incident, determined that the shark had likely been hunting in deeper waters beyond the headland. A seasonal shift in the local seal population had brought the predators closer to shore than usual, and the shark had possibly detected Eliza's movements through vibrations in the water. The contrast of her dark wetsuit against the light sandy bottom may have resembled the silhouette of a seal from below. The initial strike severed Eliza's femoral artery. Jonathan, hearing his wife's single scream before she was pulled underwater, immediately swam to her location. The shark, having delivered its catastrophic bite, disappeared as quickly as it had arrived, a behavior typical of great whites, which often retreat after an initial strike to wait for prey to weaken. With remarkable presence of mind, Jonathan managed to pull Eliza toward the shore. He later recalled that the water around them had turned crimson almost instantly. Despite his desperate attempts to stem the bleeding using his rash guard as a makeshift tourniquet, the blood loss was too severe and too rapid. Their isolated location meant that his calls for help went unanswered. Eliza lost consciousness within minutes. According to Jonathan's devastating account to first responders, she died in his arms on the beach at approximately 9:52 a.m. Their unborn child, a boy they had planned to name Thomas, had no chance of survival. The first person to arrive at the scene was Marcus Fletcher, a local retiree who had been walking his dog along the coastal path. He found Jonathan cradling his wife's body, both still wet from the ocean. Fletcher immediately called emergency services, but medical personnel who arrived 15 minutes later could only confirm what Jonathan already knew: his wife and unborn child were gone. News of the tragedy spread quickly through Port Lincoln. The tight-knit community, many of whom made their living from the sea, was deeply shaken. Local fishermen organized a voluntary patrol of the bay, despite marine conservation authorities advising against retaliatory hunts for the shark responsible. Dr. Wells conducted a thorough investigation of the incident, collecting water samples and interviewing witnesses about recent marine activity in the area. Her findings, published 6 months later, identified several contributing factors. An unusual migration pattern of southern fur seals had drawn great whites closer to recreational areas. Water clarity had been exceptional that day, allowing the shark to spot movement from greater distances. And the isolated nature of the cove meant that the attack went unnoticed by others who might have provided immediate assistance. The Richardson tragedy prompted local authorities to install additional warning signs along the coastline and implement a more comprehensive shark monitoring program. The town council also established a marine emergency response protocol, ensuring faster reaction times to water emergencies. 1 year after the incident, Jonathan Richardson returned to Port Lincoln to establish the Eliza Richardson Marine Safety Foundation, which funded research into shark behavior and supported improved emergency response systems in coastal communities. The foundation's first project was the installation of emergency call stations and medical supply cabinets at remote beaches throughout the Eyre Peninsula. The quiet cove where Eliza spent her final moments remains a hauntingly beautiful spot on the South Australian coast. Locals still refer to it as Shelley's Bay, but visitors are now greeted by a small memorial stone bearing the inscription, "In memory of Eliza and Thomas Richardson. Respect the ocean and all its creatures. Love endures." In 2013, Recife, Brazil, had long been known for its picturesque beaches stretching along the northeastern coast of the country. However, beneath the postcard-perfect surface lurked a darker reputation that locals had learned to respect. Since the early 1990s, this metropolitan beach area has become notorious for having one of the highest concentrations of shark attacks in the world. The construction of a port, about 40 kilometers south of Recife, had dramatically altered local marine ecosystems, disrupting traditional shark migration patterns and feeding grounds. What made Recife particularly dangerous was the presence of bull sharks, a species uniquely adapted to survive in both salt and freshwater environments, capable of swimming far upriver and navigating through urban waterways. On March 15th, the city experienced unprecedented rainfall, with over 300 millimeters falling within just 24 hours. This intense downpour transformed normally bustling coastal streets into swirling muddy canals. Civil defense authorities issued evacuation orders for low-lying areas, but many tourists, unfamiliar with local hazards, remained in their beachfront hotels, perceiving the flooding more as an inconvenience than a serious threat. Among these visitors was Philippe Dumont, a 42-year-old engineering consultant from Lyon, France. Dumont had arrived in Recife 3 days earlier to attend an international conference on sustainable urban development. Ironically, one of the conference panels had addressed climate change and extreme weather events, a subject that would soon become devastatingly relevant to his fate. According to witnesses who later spoke to authorities, Dumont had ventured out from the hotel around midday, despite hotel staff warnings about dangerous conditions. The rain had temporarily subsided, creating a deceptive calm. The streets immediately surrounding the hotel had flooded to approximately waist height, with murky seawater pushed inland by the combination of high tide and storm surge. Local residents had already spotted debris floating in from the ocean, including branches, plastic waste, and small marine life. Carolina Mendez, who operated a nearby cafe, observed Dumont carefully wading through the submerged avenue, taking photographs of the unusual urban seascape with his smartphone. She later reported to investigators that the Frenchman seemed fascinated rather than concerned, stopping occasionally to capture images of the transformed cityscape. Mendez had been in the process of securing her storefront when she noticed Dumont's backpack slip from his shoulder and become caught on a partially submerged railing, approximately 20 meters from where she stood. Carolina Mendez recounted what happened next. At 12:37 p.m., she saw Dumont turn back toward the railing to retrieve his bag. The water around him was a cloudy brown, visibility limited to just a few centimeters below the surface. As he reached for the backpack, Mendez noticed a sudden disturbance in the water, a flash of movement that she later described as a dark shape cutting through the flood. She screamed, warning him, but it was too late. The attack was swift and brutal. The shark struck from Dumont's right side, its powerful jaws clamping just below his knee. The water erupted in a violent splash as the shark executed its characteristic bite and shake motion, designed to tear flesh and disable prey. Dumont's scream alerted nearby residents, who rushed to windows and balconies in time to witness the horrifying scene unfolding. 3 local men, fisherman Eduardo Santos, off-duty firefighter Marco Oliveira, and taxi driver Tiago Pereira, immediately rushed into the flooded street. Santos, drawing on his experience with marine predators, grabbed a metal pole from a collapsed market stall. Oliveira followed with a length of rope from his emergency kit, while Pereira carried a first aid box he kept in his taxi. By the time they reached Dumont, the shark had torn away a significant portion of his lower leg and retreated into deeper water. The Frenchman had collapsed backward, kept partially afloat by the buoyancy of the floodwater. Santos and Oliveira pulled him toward the nearest building entrance, a dental clinic with steps rising above the water level, while Pereira tried to fashion a tourniquet from his belt. Despite their rapid response, Dumont had already lost catastrophic amounts of blood. The water around them had turned a dark red, spreading outward in a grim cloud. Dr. Maria Ferreira, who happened to be working in the dental clinic, rushed out to assist, but later reported that Dumont had already lost consciousness by the time they brought him to dry ground. Despite their desperate efforts to revive him, Philippe Dumont was pronounced dead at 1:05 p.m., approximately 28 minutes after the initial attack. Dr. Rafael Costa, a marine biologist who later interviewed multiple eyewitnesses and examined environmental conditions from that day, concluded that the attack bore all the signs of an opportunistic bull shark encounter. The animal had likely followed the influx of seawater into the flooded streets and, disoriented by the urban setting, relied on electroreception, its ability to detect electrical signals from prey, to strike. The incident sent shockwaves through both local and international communities. Recife's authorities faced harsh criticism for inadequate warning systems and emergency response protocols during flood conditions. Marine safety experts pointed out that while shark attacks were a known risk along Recife's beaches, the threat of sharks in flooded urban areas had never been properly addressed in disaster planning. In the aftermath, Mayor Antonio Silva established a specialized urban flood response unit trained specifically to deal with marine predators in unusual environments. The city installed additional drainage systems and flood barriers designed to prevent seawater incursion into residential areas. Warning signs in multiple languages were placed throughout coastal neighborhoods, explicitly mentioning the danger of sharks during flood conditions. Philippe Dumont's family established a foundation in his name, dedicated to researching the intersection of climate change, urban development, and wildlife conflicts. The foundation worked closely with local conservationists to develop educational programs about bull shark behavior and flood safety for both residents and tourists. 1 year after the tragedy, a small memorial plaque was placed on the wall of the dental clinic where Dumont had drawn his final breaths. The simple inscription read, "In memory of Philippe Dumont, when nature reclaims its spaces, we must remember our place within it, not above it." The tragic incident remains a stark reminder that as climate patterns shift and extreme weather events become more common, the boundaries between human and wild environments grow increasingly blurred, creating new and unexpected dangers in once familiar spaces. Reunion Island stood as a paradoxical paradise in the Indian Ocean. Located east of Madagascar, this French overseas department boasted breathtaking volcanic landscapes, lush tropical forests, and vibrant coral reefs that attracted adventure seekers from across the globe. Yet beneath its picturesque surface, the island harbored a darker reputation. Since 2011, it has experienced an unprecedented surge in shark attacks, prompting local authorities to ban swimming and surfing along most of its coastline. Despite these restrictions, the allure of the island's underwater treasures continued to draw experienced divers willing to venture into its complex marine ecosystem. Among these treasures lay the wreck of the SS Mauritius, a cargo vessel that had sunk during a cyclone in 1979, coming to rest on a sandy bottom 30 meters below the surface. Over 4 decades, the shipwreck had transformed into an artificial reef, attracting diverse marine life and, consequently, predators. Local dive operators maintained strict protocols when visiting the site, including limitations on group sizes and mandatory shark briefings before any descent. On April 23rd, a group of 5 experienced divers embarked on an expedition to explore the wreck. The group consisted of dive master Alejandro Morales, a 41-year-old Spanish expatriate who had logged over 3,000 dives in these waters; Harrison Wallace, a 38-year-old petroleum engineer from Houston with advanced certification; Sophia Nakamura, a 35-year-old marine biologist from Tokyo conducting research on coral colonization of artificial structures; Victor Dubois, a 44-year-old French photographer specializing in underwater imagery; and Ananya Patel, a 29-year-old software developer from Mumbai who had recently earned her technical diving certification. The morning had begun with ideal conditions: minimal wind, excellent visibility, and mild currents. According to the dive plan later recovered from Morales' logbook, the group intended to circle the wreck counterclockwise, entering through a large breach in the hull midship before exploring the relatively intact stern section. They had planned for a bottom time of 40 minutes, including a 5-minute safety stop at 5 meters depth before surfacing. The dive boat captain, Jean-Claude Benoit, reported that the group entered the water at 10:17 a.m., descending along the mooring line attached to the wreck's bow. Surface conditions remained calm, with sunlight penetrating deeply enough to illuminate the entirety of the wreck. Benoit maintained radio contact with another dive boat approximately 300 meters away, exchanging routine updates about sea conditions. 28 minutes into the dive, the situation deteriorated with alarming speed. According to accounts later provided by the survivors, the group had just entered the cargo hold when Victor Dubois, slightly separated from the others while photographing a school of batfish, noticed an unusual shadow moving along the sand channel adjacent to the wreck. Before he could alert the others, a massive tiger shark, estimated to be nearly 4 meters in length, emerged from behind a collapsed bulkhead. Marine biologists who reviewed Dubois' recovered camera footage noted that the shark displayed classic territorial behavior rather than hunting patterns. Its approach was direct and purposeful, lacking the investigative circling typically seen before predatory strikes. One expert later hypothesized that the shark likely perceived the divers as intruders in what had become its established territory. The shark targeted Wallace first, approaching from his blind spot and clamping down on his right arm with devastating force. Nakamura, who witnessed the initial attack from less than 3 meters away, later described hearing the sickening crunch of bones even underwater. The shark's powerful jaws crushed Wallace's forearm, severing his regulator hose and triggering an immediate cascade of emergency situations: traumatic injury, loss of air supply, and the onset of panic. Morales reacted with remarkable composure, promptly signaling the emergency to the group as he moved toward Wallace. Patel, positioned closest to the victim, attempted to distract the shark by striking it with her aluminum camera housing. The shark released Wallace momentarily, circling tightly around the group as clouds of blood dispersed into the water column, potentially triggering feeding behavior. The next few minutes became a desperate struggle for survival. Dubois later reported that Morales had managed to establish buddy breathing with Wallace, sharing his alternate air source, while Nakamura attempted to apply a tourniquet using equipment from her research belt. Meanwhile, Patel and Dubois positioned themselves between the injured diver and the increasingly aggressive shark, which continued to circle the group with growing intensity. The confined space of the cargo hold complicated their emergency ascent. The group needed to navigate through the narrow breach in the hull while managing Wallace's injury and maintaining vigilance against further attacks. As they began moving toward the exit, the shark charged a second time, this time striking Patel's fins before circling back toward Wallace. Using their dive knives and emergency flashers, the 4 uninjured divers formed a protective formation around Wallace, slowly retreating toward open water. The shark pursued relentlessly, making multiple passes and becoming increasingly agitated by the divers' defensive maneuvers. At approximately 35 meters depth outside the wreck, Dubois reported that the shark lunged again, this time grazing Morales' shoulder and tearing his exposure suit. The emergency ascent proved nearly as dangerous as the attack itself. Maritime safety investigators later determined that the group had been forced to rise faster than safety protocols recommended, increasing their risk of decompression sickness. Adding to their peril, the current had intensified during their time underwater, pushing them away from the dive boat. After surfacing approximately 70 meters from their entry point, the divers signaled distress to Captain Benoit, who immediately navigated toward them. Wallace, drifting in and out of consciousness due to shock and blood loss, was pulled aboard first. The remaining divers maintained a defensive circle in the water until all were safely retrieved, with the shark still visible beneath them. Once aboard, Morales and Nakamura applied proper medical tourniquets and pressure bandages to Wallace's shattered arm, while Benoit radioed for emergency medical evacuation. A helicopter from Reunion's Maritime Rescue Service arrived within 22 minutes, hoisting Wallace and Nakamura, who had begun showing symptoms of decompression sickness, to the local hospital. Wallace underwent emergency surgery to repair his devastated limb. Despite the surgeon's best efforts, they were unable to restore full functionality to his arm. Nakamura spent 3 days in a hyperbaric chamber recovering from the effects of their rapid ascent. Morales required 17 stitches for the laceration on his shoulder. Remarkably, both Dubois and Patel escaped physical injury, though all 5 divers later reported symptoms of post-traumatic stress. The tiger shark incident prompted Reunion's maritime authorities to implement even stricter diving regulations around wreck sites, including mandatory shark shields for all divers and the presence of dedicated shark spotters on dive boats. Marine biologists installed acoustic monitoring systems around the SS Mauritius wreck to track shark movements and behavior patterns. 6 months after the attack, Wallace established the Harrison Wallace Foundation for Marine Safety, dedicated to developing improved emergency protocols for dive operators worldwide. In a poignant gesture of resilience, he returned to Reunion with the other 4 divers on the first anniversary of the incident, though they chose to commemorate their survival with a shore dive in a protected marine reserve rather than returning to the site that had nearly claimed their lives. In 2005, Cape Agulhas, South Africa, was recognized as the official dividing line between the Indian and Atlantic Oceans. At the southernmost tip of the African continent, this rugged coastline is known for its treacherous waters, dramatic temperature fluctuations, and extraordinary marine biodiversity. For centuries, the indigenous Khoikhoi people had regarded these waters with a mixture of reverence and fear, naming the area Cape of Needles for its jagged reef formations that had claimed countless ships. Modern maritime charts still label the offshore waters as one of the world's most dangerous shipping routes. But for a different community, freedivers and underwater photographers, the unique confluence of warm and cold currents created an unparalleled underwater ecosystem worth the inherent risks. Sebastian Khoury, a 36-year-old Lebanese South African freediver, knew these waters better than most. After moving to nearby Struisbaai 15 years earlier to study marine biology, he developed an almost symbiotic relationship with the local environment. His underwater photography of the region's kelp forests had been widely recognized, and his breath-holding capacity of 7 minutes and 43 seconds had earned him respect in international freediving circles. Local fishermen often commented that Khoury seemed more comfortable beneath the waves than above them. On the morning of May 7th, Khoury embarked on what was intended to be a routine photography expedition. He had been documenting seasonal changes in the Cape's kelp forests for an upcoming exhibition titled Forests Beneath the Convergence. According to Jacob van der Merwe, the boat operator who had transported Khoury to his preferred diving spot approximately 800 meters offshore, conditions seemed favorable: light offshore winds, moderate swell, and water visibility extending to about 15 meters. Van der Merwe later reported to maritime authorities that Khoury had planned 3 dives to varying depths, with the deepest reaching approximately 25 meters. The area was known for its dense forests of Eclonia maxima, a species of kelp that could grow up to 12 meters tall, creating underwater canopies that played host to diverse marine life. Unknown to either man, these same forests served as hunting corridors for the region's apex predator, the great white shark. Following standard safety protocol, Khoury was attached to a thin safety line connected to a surface buoy, allowing van der Merwe to track his position. The freediver entered the water at 5:47 a.m., timing his expedition to coincide with what photographers call the golden hour underwater, when angled morning light created ethereal beams through the kelp canopy. He wore a dark green wetsuit with black fins, equipment chosen for thermal protection rather than visual considerations. According to van der Merwe, the first 2 dives proceeded without incident, Corey surfaced briefly between descents, exchanging hand signals that indicated successful photography and favorable conditions. The third dive began at approximately 6:32 a.m. Corey took 4 deep preparation breaths before slipping beneath the surface with practiced calm, his monofin propelling him downward in a fluid dolphin kick. Roughly 7 minutes later, Van der Merwe noticed the safety line suddenly go slack, a sign he recognized as serious. Acting quickly, he began hauling in the line while scanning the water's surface. When it surfaced severed with frayed ends that looked cut rather than snapped under tension, he triggered his emergency position, indicating radio beacon, EPIRB, and broadcast a mayday call. A slick of blood appeared about 30 meters from the boat shortly afterward. Marine rescue teams arrived within 18 minutes. Searchers soon found fragments of Corey's carbon fiber monofin and his damaged underwater camera housing. The search for Sebastian Corey continued for 3 days, involving Coast Guard vessels, volunteer divers, and drone surveillance. On the afternoon of May 10th, partial remains were recovered and later confirmed to belong to the missing freediver. The evidence painted a grim picture of his final moments. Based on interviews with the search and recovery team, marine biologists concluded that Corey had likely been ambushed near the sandy bottom of the kelp forest. One diver, speaking under anonymity, described the area as unusually silent and tense, with signs of a recent disturbance in the silt and vegetation. Dr. Miranda Collins, a shark behavior specialist, later explained to the inquest panel that deep ambush strikes by great whites are not common but are known in such environments. Unlike surface attacks, these underwater strikes tend to be singular and decisive, aimed at disorienting prey before escape is possible. The lack of multiple bite marks on the remains suggested this type of predation. Investigators concluded that the shark likely approached from below, using the kelp as cover. Given the freediver's stillness during underwater photography, the predator may have detected him through electroreception, sensing the faint electrical fields from his heartbeat and muscle activity. The tragedy sent ripples through both the local community and international freediving circles. The Cape Agulhas municipality established new protocols requiring freediving pairs instead of solo descents, and mandated bright-colored equipment to reduce visual similarities to seals. Additionally, specific dawn and dusk periods were designated as restricted times for freediving in known great white shark territories. In a poignant gesture of respect for both the diver and the predator, Corey's family donated his research and photographic archive to a conservation organization in Cape Town. They specifically requested that no culling or hunting of sharks occur in response to the incident, noting that Sebastian had often spoken about the ecological importance of apex predators and the risks he willingly accepted in sharing their environment. A year after the tragedy, a weathered stone marker was placed on the cliffs overlooking the site of Corey's final dive. The international free diving community now observes an annual Safety Dive Day on May 7th, dedicated to reviewing and improving safety protocols. Sebastian Corey's final underwater images, excluding any depicting the predator, were posthumously exhibited as originally planned, with proceeds establishing a scholarship fund for marine conservation students focusing on predator-human coexistence strategies. In 1993, a stretch of coastline along California's Central Shore evoked the charm of a forgotten postcard from simpler times. Located in a small town midway between San Francisco and Los Angeles, the shoreline was known for its striking blue waters, distinctive moonstone pebbles, and dramatic bluffs that sheltered the cove below from the wind. The peaceful reputation of the area made the events of September 18th all the more shocking. Eleanor Blackwood, 76, and her sister Margaret Blackwood, 72, had arrived in the town 3 days earlier as part of a long-awaited reunion. The sisters, separated for most of their adult lives by both geography and circumstance, had not seen each other in person for nearly 17 years. Eleanor, a retired school principal from Portland, Oregon, and Margaret, a widowed librarian from Minneapolis, Minnesota, had finally overcome the obstacles that had kept them apart, choosing the quaint coastal town as neutral ground to reconnect. According to their detailed reservation book recovered from their vacation rental, the sisters had planned every day of their 2-week stay with meticulous care. Each evening was designated for a specific activity, designed to help them rebuild their fractured relationship. On that particular Friday, They had scheduled a sunset wade in the gentle surf, a childhood tradition from their summers spent at their grandparents' lake house in Michigan. Witnesses later reported that the sisters arrived at the beach around 6:40 p.m., just as the day visitors were packing up, and the setting sun cast long shadows across the water. They had chosen a relatively secluded section, approximately 300 yards south of the main public access point, where a natural rock formation created a small, protected pool during low tide. Both women wore light summer dresses over modest swimwear, Eleanor in navy blue, Margaret in forest green, and carried matching woven beach bags containing towels, a thermos of tea, and a small collection of sea glass they had gathered earlier that day. Scott Mendoza, a local photographer capturing the sunset from the bluffs above, later recounted seeing the sisters standing ankle-deep in the water, arms linked, their silver hair catching the golden light of the setting sun. He described a moment of calm, followed by a sudden, unusual disturbance in the water. Moments later, the situation turned tragic. At approximately 7:02 p.m., the peaceful evening was shattered. According to statements from 3 separate witnesses, a great white shark estimated to be 14 feet in length suddenly breached the shallow water where the sisters stood. The initial strike targeted Eleanor, the shark's powerful jaws clamping onto her right ankle and lower calf with devastating force. In the chaos that followed, Margaret instinctively moved toward her sister rather than away, a decision that marine biologists later suggested may have inadvertently triggered a second strike, with the shark biting into her left calf before retreating into deeper water. The sisters' screams alerted Brian Chen, an off-duty paramedic who had been jogging along the shoreline, and Sophia Winstead, a marine biology graduate student, who recognized immediately what was happening. Both rushed into the water despite the obvious danger. Chen later reported that the water around the women had already turned an alarming shade of crimson, spreading outward with each wave. Winstead, drawing on her training, directed Chen to help her drag the sisters toward shore while keeping them as horizontal as possible to minimize blood loss. Eleanor had gone into shock almost immediately, her face ashen and her eyes unfocused, while Margaret remained conscious and alert despite her injury, repeatedly asking about her sister's condition rather than her own. Local residents Thomas and Diana Harrington, who had been walking their dog nearby, immediately called emergency services while providing their beach blankets to help keep the victims warm. Diana, a retired nurse, assisted Chen in applying makeshift tourniquets using beach towels and driftwood as impromptu splints. The first emergency responders arrived within 8 minutes, a remarkably quick response for the remote location, but found both women already in critical condition from blood loss and the beginning stages of hypovolemic shock. The sisters were transported via helicopter to the nearest trauma center equipped to handle such severe injuries. Despite receiving multiple blood transfusions and undergoing emergency surgery, Eleanor never regained consciousness, succumbing to her injuries at 11:23 p.m. that same night. Margaret survived the initial surgery, but faced an arduous recovery, including multiple follow-up procedures and the eventual partial amputation of her left leg below the knee. The attack galvanized the scientific community. Dr. Nathan Reynolds led a comprehensive investigation of the incident, collecting water samples, interviewing witnesses, and analyzing migration patterns of local marine life. His team's findings, published 6 months later, identified several unusual factors that may have contributed to the attack. An abnormally warm water event had disrupted typical great white migration patterns. A recent increase in the harbor seal population had drawn more sharks to coastal waters, and the sisters' rhythmic movement in the shallow water during low-light conditions may have mimicked the movement patterns of the shark's natural prey. A year after the attack, Margaret Blackwood, displaying remarkable resilience, returned to the place where the incident happened. Using a prosthetic leg and accompanied by her daughter and 2 grandchildren, she placed a small memorial plaque on a boulder. The simple bronze marker bore Eleanor's name, birth and death dates, and the inscription, "The sea brings us together in life and memory."